The World Economic Forum annual meeting in Davos this year. Jeroen, your first time, what were your reflections?
Indeed, my first time, Malcolm. I was going with a very open mind, not exactly knowing what to expect. I found it fascinating. I found it very worthwhile. I went in with an open mind, also to see, what it brought us. At a personal level, it brings a lot of ideas and inspiration. But in addition, I think it brings a lot of value because of the many meetings you can have with people, the many of bilateral meetings, the effort it would take and the ability to have that number of meetings throughout the year. And this is packed in 1 week. I think it's very valuable.
Connie, coming from Asia and having been to Davos before, what were your reflections at the end of Davos?
Well, it's interesting. It's not my first Davos. But there are some things that don't change. A lot of snow. This year there was a lot of ice coming from Asia. Now that's very challenging. Every Davos is different. Every Davos has been different for me. This time, I would say so far it's been my best Davos for a few reasons. The issues discussed were very real. I felt there was a greater sense of humility in the atmosphere. And I say that because the themes that are being discussed are a lot more wide-ranging, a lot more real. We're talking about climate change. There was a huge sense about the future of our workforce, the youth. Are we leaving people behind? And these, I think, are real issues.
So, no Trump, government shutdown, no Macron, Gilets jaunes. No May, the small matter of Brexit. Populism does seem to be moving from the fringes to the mainstream. How was that reflected in the Davos conversations? And I note that actually the Chinese this year had their largest ever delegation at Davos.
Indeed, a very senior government official represented the Chinese delegation. He was there to bring a message to the world about how China wants to engage. I think it's an interesting Davos because there are a lot of issues looming, not issues which one country can solve by itself and needs a lot of engagement. But what's I think more interesting is the focus of all the different corporations, the different chairmen and senior people on real issues such as what are we going to do about AI? How's AI transforming our company? How are we going to transcend culture, the company's culture, to embrace AI and technology? And that cuts across European companies, Chinese companies, Southeast Asian companies.
Jeroen, I mean, that's quite interesting. Were there different debates, dialogues going on between Asian business and government, European business and government, and US business and government? Or were those conversations combined? Were they part of a sort of global debate discussion? Can you see the world fragmenting, as many think it is, or can you see it coming back together, or the potential for it to come back together?
Well, I think listening to Connie, that was very much a takeaway for me. I mean, the problems we're facing are global, and they've been global for a long time, but they are becoming increasingly global. You mentioned climate change. Now, climate change was a very, very big topic, and obviously that is a global topic. It's not just a global topic, it's about our globe. AI, technology, they're all very global challenges, opportunities, and risks. And at the same time, we need to address those together. But at the same time, the world is becoming more multipolar. I remember the word balkanization, populism you mentioned. So we are withdrawing behind our borders and barriers, etc., whilst the problems we are facing are becoming ever more global and need to be addressed with increasing speed. So that I came away with, wow, that's a really big challenge. And it's not new, but it really was brought home to me by listening and being around in Davos for a couple of days.
At Davos this year, climate change, quite rightly, was top of the agenda. And one of the UK's national treasures, Sir David Attenborough, was, I think, one of the stars of Davos this year. He talked about moving from the Holocene era to the Anthropocene era, which is the era of the human. Can I just get your takeaways on climate change and its profile and some of the discussion around it at Davos?
It's been on the agenda for many years, and rightly so. We are at the brink of being too late. There's going to be a point that it's going to be irreversible. And our Garden of Eden is no more. And that is a sentence that really stuck. So the theme was very central. That is not new. What I understand is new is the sort of sense of urgency now with big business and governments. And it was moving away from the talk to really the walk.
Are there different attitudes and approaches to climate change between the US, Europe and Asia? And Connie, what's your sense in Asia of the threat of climate change?
I think in Asia, companies are probably, I'd say they're sort of on average a few steps behind. But that said, it's picking up pace. Leaders in companies no longer can ignore the cry for sustainable business practices. Certainly when we had a bilateral meeting with a very senior client, there was a lot of talk about how his institution invests in impact, they call it impact investing and sustainable investing. And I think right now, more so than any other time, the cry for investing in sustainable industries is louder and louder.
And how can regulation play a part in addressing climate change? What can governments do and what can businesses do together in order to ensure that the right decisions are made?
A lot of the change is coming from businesses, and the reason it's coming from businesses is, other than understanding that we need to do right by the planet and by ourselves, there is a far more purely economical reason. If renewable energy becomes cheaper and the margins are better than coal or other natural resources, we will pivot that way for pure business reasons. And I think where governments can help, going back to your questions, is to enable the businesses that will help our planet foster, just creating an environment where those businesses can operate.
So that's the voice of the consumer, the voice of the people, which is driving business to make the right decisions. A business doing the right thing, which is great.
Certainly in China, the government is increasing the awareness of it. In my own practice area, green bonds and green financing is becoming a very big topic. Certainly part of the Chinese leadership's grand plans for the next few years to promote sustainable financing.
China is the biggest issuer of green bonds in the world, is that correct?
Yes.
And that's encouraging. Well, I think this is an area again which is going to stay on the agenda, quite rightly so, and I think that the contribution that we can make as a business, I think, is really, really important. What was your one big takeaway from Davos this year?
One is the upcoming, and hopefully can avoid it, but US-China or East-West Cold War that people were talking about, and not Cold War in the sense that we had in the 1980s with Russia, which was around armaments, etc., but about technology. The Cold War is really going to be, the war is going to be around technology, and I think we're seeing some of that arising already. The other one, I think, is the related one, which I mentioned earlier. Our problems are global, increasingly global: climate change, technology, workforce, everything. Movement of people, migration. And the world is becoming less and less global, but more and more multipolar. So those two things are two takeaways.
Connie?
The biggest takeaway for me is around education.
Good.
Education, how are we educating our younger generation to embrace a world of change? What are the skill sets that are needed for them to face this new world of AI and technology? But also more importantly, how are we educating them more holistically about basic human values, compassion, empathy? I think these will be really important in a big world, scary world of technology and AI.
And I think there are also things which, Clifford Chance also needs to contribute to in the education of our people, our lawyers, and everyone who works with us. So I think that's a great point on which to end, and thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.